Hi, I'm Paige Nick. I'm one of the writers on this podcast. For the last 4 weeks, we've been following the journey of South African journalist and podcaster Sam Ngwenya in the year 2218, as he documents the life of the first person to turn 200, his great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, Lesedi Ndaba. Everything you hear in this podcast is based on current science and future forecasts by some of the world's leading experts in the fields of gerontology, future finance, actuarial science, longevity, psychology, and technology. In this bonus episode, we'll share some new thoughts from our leading present-day experts selected by the writing team behind the show. This is The 200-Year-Old.
Scientists predict that the first person to live to 200 may have already been born. Everything you hear in this podcast is based on current science and future forecasts by leading experts. As Sanlam turns 100 this year, they are looking ahead at what fundamental changes might take place in the world so that we can plan better for the future.
One of the fundamental issues covered in this podcast was the science behind longevity, trying to find an answer to the question, how could it be possible to live to 200? We spoke to Jay Olshansky. He is a professor of public health at the University of Illinois in Chicago. He's not as convinced that we'll get all the way to 200, but he believes we're definitely going to live a whole lot longer.
My expertise is in human aging and longevity, so the focus of my work has been on estimating how long humans are capable of living and then trying to figure out a way to slow the biological process of aging so that we can extend our period of healthy life. So I've really been focused on fundamental public health issues, trying to figure out why we live as long as we do, and then attempting to find a way to improve public health by extending healthy life. Well, all right. So, questions come up. How close are we to developing an intervention that's actually going to enter the marketplace? Now, I'll be honest with you. This question has been asked of people involved in this industry for about 2,000 years. And the answer has always been the same. We're about 10 years away from some sort of therapeutic intervention that's going to, make somebody wealthy and, achieve nirvana for the rest of us. Well, I'm not going to give you that answer because I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if we're 10 years away or 5 years away or 15 years away. What I do know is that the evidence has emerged just within the last decade or so to suggest that it's a viable target, that it's now already been accomplished in other species, and there's every reason to believe that this can be accomplished in humans. Well, the kinds of things that we might be able to do to slow down the biological process of aging would include a broad range of research studies that are already underway. Just by way of example, one is the study of the healthiest, oldest individuals among us, the study of centenarians, people who live past 100, and super centenarians, people who live past 110. So it's not like it's a secret. These folks have already lived for 100 years, sometimes 110 years. Some of them make it very healthy out into older ages. And we think that they're able to do so because they've been experiencing a slower biological clock. And we think that slower biological clock means that biological time ticks for them at a slower pace. So researchers are trying to find out what the genetics is behind these slower biological clocks that exist in these people so that we can confer that advantage to the rest of us. And I would point out, by the way, that it's not just the science that's advancing rapidly, but also the funding has also increased quite dramatically. Keep in mind, any intervention that successfully slows the biological process of aging will transform the inventor of that intervention into a multi-billionaire overnight. It will instantly become one of the most important interventions in medical history. So there you've got a number of organizations and companies now scrambling to move into this space of the longevity dividend in an effort to essentially profit from it.
So, if it's physically possible to survive to the age of 200, how is it possible to survive financially for that long? This issue came up in our research a lot and led us to people who'd been thinking about this problem for some time, like expert David Tull.
My name is David Tull. I am the president of Quantum and Forecasting. We are a research and consulting agency that uses long-term strategic forecasting to help organizations thrive from future trends. There are well-funded labs around the world who are actively working on a range of ideas to help people reach the age of 130 or 150 by the late 2040s. Now, obviously, this is going to have a giant impact on the average person's finances. For example, for those people who do choose to extend their lifespans, and trust me, not everyone will, these people will have to reconsider how they are going to afford to pay for all of those extra decades. I mean, the average person's retirement fund today is usually designed to last maybe 20, 30 years at most. So if you add another few decades of life, then chances are you're going to have to go back to work. And since governments around the world are already struggling to figure out how they're going to afford their existing national pension funds to pay for today's retirees, there's just no way that today's governments will be able to afford paying for an average retirement that lasts an extra 2 to 4 decades, especially in countries as big as China or the US, for example. Inherently, this will give people who take these life extension therapies early just a long-term advantage in life, because they will be able to extend their working years, and they will be able to, if they live correctly or intelligently, they'll be able to build upon their wealth in a manner that is significantly greater than the average person. Now, this will obviously have a variety of social implications. Now, smaller countries, on the other hand, they may even pay billions of dollars to extend the healthy working lives of their citizens. And they'll do this in order to save billions more on reducing the cost of their senior care programs. But they could also generate trillions of dollars, especially if you're the US or China or India, in economic value by keeping the national workforce active and working for decades longer. Now, it's also worthwhile to mention that as robots take more and more of our jobs and produce more and more of the products and services we use day to day, that the cost of living will come down significantly in the future by the 2030s, 2040s, even to a point where the government might be able to afford to just give people money, free money, in the form of a universal basic income.
Universal basic income. That's the idea of giving everyone in the country enough money to survive on. It was a really interesting concept that we suggested would be the way society would cope with a potentially larger population and the rise of AI. David Tull told us more about it.
But it's also an idea that will likely take another decade or two if it's ever accepted to begin with. The thing is, governments are experimenting with UBI now as a kind of insurance experiment, so that if the economy ever does suffer from either a future Great Depression or from structurally high unemployment due to robots and AI taking, humans' jobs, then at least these governments will have the UBI to fall back on. And why it's attractive is because the UBI effectively jumpstarts the economy by giving unemployed people money that they can count on getting monthly. It will encourage them to spend it on rent or other common goods that will keep the economy going. Now, the downside is that some people think that the UBI will encourage people not to work, or that it will bankrupt the country. However, the experiments we've done so far have proven the opposite. Experiments with the UBI have shown that people who receive a UBI benefit from less stress and better mental health, they have food to eat and a roof above their heads. They are physically healthier. They are more willing to go back to school to improve their skills, and they work harder and longer because they are freer to find the work that's more meaningful to them.
We also asked David Tull about automation, AI, and their connection with universal basic income.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why the topic of the UBI has been getting so much press over the past few years is in part due to the increasing fear that artificial intelligence and robots are just going to take everyone's jobs and will make everyone unemployable. And if people just don't have jobs, that will lead to a variety of social ills, widespread unemployment, and an economy that basically crumbles under its own weight. Because obviously, we can give all the jobs to robots, but at the end of the day, robots don't really buy anything. They don't go to the restaurant. They don't buy a new pair of shoes. Ultimately, it is we humans that keep the economy going. And in order for us to actually consume, we also need to contribute to society, through employment. For example, in the U.S., a lot of the political discourse is around immigrants stealing jobs or jobs going overseas, when in reality, the biggest job killer over the past decade or so has been automation. So, for example, when about 20 or 30 years ago, some of your older listeners might remember that banks used to be much, much bigger than they are today. Most banks had 20 or 30 tellers to help people with their everyday banking needs. However, after the computer became a widespread instrument of business, after the ATM was finally invented, a lot of these bank teller positions went away, and rightly so. However, even though all of those bank teller jobs disappeared, that allowed banks to downsize the size of their banks, but in that process, it also allowed banks to open up many more locations than they would have otherwise been able to afford to do. So even though ATMs may have destroyed jobs on one hand, they enabled banks to create a number of new branches that, in so doing, created a great deal of new employment.
The next big topic we covered was personal life, how living for 200 years might affect our relationships and day-to-day life. As we were starting to discover, once we move into a post-aging society, pretty much everything changes. David Tull also had some really interesting insights on this.
If that expected lifespan extended to 120 or longer, there will be less pressure to start your post-secondary education immediately after high school, or less pressure to finish your degree early. There will be less pressure to start and stick to one profession or one company or industry, as your working years will allow for multiple professions in a variety of different industries. There will be less pressure to marry early, leading to longer periods of casual dating. Even the concept of forever marriages will have to be rethought, potentially being replaced by decades-long marriage contracts that, for some people, recognize the impermanence of true love over extended lifespans of, 50 years, 100 years, and maybe even longer. There will be less pressure to have children early, as women can devote decades to establishing independent careers without the worry of becoming infertile. And again, we'll have to just forget about retirement altogether. In order to afford a lifespan that stretches into the 3 digits, you'll need to work well into those three digits.
My name is Paul Irving, and I'm the chairman of the Center for the Future of Aging at the Milken Institute. I'm also distinguished scholar in residence at the University of Southern California Davis School of Gerontology, and I'm involved in a variety of other organizations focused on healthy and productive and meaningful longevity. So a question that people oftentimes ask is, can older workers, can older people provide benefit to economies, or will they simply be burdens? Will they simply represent a cost? And I very much believe that for enlightened leaders in public policy and enlightened leaders in business, we face a really not just a great challenge, but an exceptional opportunity. Older people represent a new market for products and services and innovations. Frankly, they are an underserved market today, and the possibility for designing new, compelling, again, products and services that serve their needs and aspirations is a great 21st century business opportunity for companies across the world. And on the workforce front, there's little question that older people add something very special to employment environments and to employers. They mentor younger people. They reflect kind of company history, and they understand legacy and tradition and kind of where things have come from. They blend in that sense beautifully with young workers who bring their inquisitiveness and their fresh thinking and their curiosity, but oftentimes don't have the ability to navigate across environments, to problem solve using kind of multiple ways of thinking. They don't oftentimes have the balance of older workers.
Jay Olshansky also had some really interesting insights on intergenerational relationships.
One of the questions that's arisen frequently is, if we produce these larger cohorts of older people, are they going to take jobs away from younger people? Is there going to be some sort of intergenerational conflict? Or is there going to be some problem as, computers or automation take jobs away from people? And really, I think we have to think creatively about how to utilize this workforce. I think what you're going to find is a lot of older individuals are going to be much more interested in job sharing. They may not be interested in working full-time. They may be interested in working, 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week, but remaining engaged in some way or another. So we're going to have to find creative ways of utilizing this resource.
And what about people living to see not only their grandchildren grow up, but maybe their great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren growing up? Here's Paul Irving again on the significance of multiple generations coexisting.
The question of the existence of multiple generations within families should be seen as a wonderful opportunity that didn't exist in generations past. The possibility for grandparents and great grandparents to mentor and support not just their children, grandchildren, and great grandchildren, but the parents. So there is a codependency opportunity, an opportunity for a shared caregiving and support across those generations.
One of the biggest changes in society that we included in the podcast was the rise of these very immersive virtual reality spaces, and this is where we will meet and interact in the future. Here's future designer Monica Bielskita to explain more.
I am Monica Bielskita, and I'm a future researcher, futurist, and a future designer. I work across 3 very different industries that are interestingly interconnected. So I work with entertainment industry, most exclusively actually on sci-fi projects. I design what futures look like for movies, series, and everything around it, so fictional future worlds. And I, as of most recently, started working with cities, countries, and governments in helping them focus not just on immediate problems, but actually imagine what is that future city or that future country, that future civilization that they want to be. And how they could work backwards all the way to the present moment and the choices they're making today and the policies they're writing today and the type of infrastructure they're building.
These are the kinds of things that are happening right now in virtual reality and how they're most likely to impact on our lives.
The digital world will soon enough be enmeshed with the physical in such a way that our reality will be the transparency mode that we choose. So for me, the most important thing to understand is that, VR is not just another gadget. It's not about entertainment, although entertainment is part of it. And unfortunately, that's mostly how it's been marketed. Where I think we're going fundamentally with all of this is a paradigm shift in computation. How that can affect us in ways so much more visceral than any screen-based media would. Talk about future of the interface, instead of sort of like, using your finger and clicking on buttons. We're talking about a combination of voice commands, eye tracking, and EEGs embedded in devices.
What we discovered is that in the future, well, actually, it's already in its early stages of development now, but virtual environments can extend beyond purely visual experiences. This is something we picked up and used in the virtual locations of the show. Here's Monica Bilskitter explaining how haptics are starting to make this happen today.
So haptics is basically whatever wearable devices on your body or tools that give you tactile feedback. So the far end development of that, a haptic suit, is a suit that you'd wear and you'd experience completely virtual sensations, such as, a bullet being shot at you, or a caress, or a hug, and you'd actually believe it's real. There's a beautiful VR project actually by friends of mine, Everest VR, and it's one of his earlier, actually really beautiful VR experiences where you get to climb Mount Everest. But it's really a superior experience to watching a documentary about climbing Mount Everest, because you can really look around and they manage to capture the atmosphere of what it is being on that mountain. And clearly it is not the same as climbing the real Mount Everest. But how many of us would be physically able to climb Mount Everest? How many of us could financially climb Mount Everest? And within what age group that is even possible at all? Right? So rendering these type of experiences more accessible, experiences that could help people understand the real world and access realities of people different than us. I mean, that's just incredible. That's wonderful. Just last week, I was giving a talk in Germany with David Eagleman. He's one of the better renowned neuroscientists. And he was presenting one of the projects that he's developing, and that was a sort of vest that was giving tactile sonic feedback to the body, and they used it on a little girl that was born deaf and blind, and so for her that's an extraordinary way to start perceiving the world. And they were using on other blind people.
We also spoke to research psychologist Tamara Sims about how we may need to change the way that we view old age.
My name's Tamara Sims. I'm a research scientist at the Stanford Center on Longevity. I was trained in research psychology, specializing in how culture and aging shape our emotional experiences and the implications that has for our well-being. We've been wired for millennia to sort of think a certain way about our lifespans. And now all of a sudden we're supposed to be thinking about this long-term distant future that we've never been brought up to think about. We certainly don't have any sort of practices or institutions that support thinking about the long-term future self. I think the real starting point is rethinking how we conceive of aging and not seeing it as sort of this negative thing that we don't want to think about, but looking at it as an opportunity to redesign life and to have, reinvent yourself at different stages of life. So it's actually this really exciting opportunity, really, if you think about it. I've done some work where we use virtual reality and age progression technology to get people to engage more with their future selves. So you can actually show younger people a picture of themselves when they're 60, just to make it a little bit more realistic. Because in general, people spend very little time thinking about their older self. In part, I think it has to do with this biological component that we're just sort of not wired to do it. And I think there's a huge cultural component too, which is that certainly in American culture, we don't like being old. We don't like to think about being old. We have negative attitudes about aging on average. So that is a deterrent as well.
But despite that, Tamara told us about this phenomenon where older people are proven to be happier.
Probably one of the most compelling findings out of that field is that as you get older, you get happier. This finding is so robust that you see it across cultures, you see it across time. So study after study, both in the United States, in Germany, in China, you see that as if you follow people over time, they report less experience of negative emotion, less anger and less anxiety, and more experience of positive emotions like feeling calm and happy. It's remarkably consistent finding. And the big question is, well, why? Yeah, because we have these sort of ideas about what it's like to get old. I think an important caveat is we're separating out aging from health. So if you're suffering and you're in pain, obviously you're not necessarily getting happy. But I think the important part is that we see aging not so much as just a biological process of, your body growing old, but an accumulation of experiences and knowledge over time. So as you get older, you begin to realize, hey, I don't have that much time in life to waste. And you start to reprioritize. So when you're young, you have all this time, you have this long nebulous future that you're preparing for. You spend a lot of time learning, meeting new people, having new experiences. And it's really hit or miss, right? As you get older, you figure that stuff out and you decide that you don't want to waste your time with people and places that aren't going to make you happy. So you become more selective.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found this as thought-provoking as we have. This has been The 200-Year-Old.
This podcast is brought to you by Sanlam. To subscribe, visit www.the200yearold.co.za. To find out more about the research that went into this episode, ask the 200-Year-Old a question on Twitter @200-Year-Old. That's @200-Year-Old. If you like this episode, please rate it and leave a review on your podcast platform.